Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to video number 73. We can see here I am joined as always by Mr. George Washington and Mr. Abraham Lincoln, and as my semi-regular guest these days, my daughter Jocelyn. So my story today is one that I was in Seattle a couple of years ago, and there was a story that I became sort of fascinated with that I learned about while I was there about a woman who refused to sell her house, and her name was Edith Macefield. And so I'm going to tell you the story of Miss Macefield here today. So what happened was that in Seattle, I guess I should back up a little bit. There's something called eminent domain that you may have heard of. This is the government has the ability to basically force you to sell your land or your house or property of yours if they need to build something that's for the good of the country, basically, whether that could be, sometimes it's roads or maybe it's a dam or who knows what it might be. But they can just come in. They give you fair market value for your property, your house, whatever, and that's that. You have to move somewhere else. You have to leave. But in cases of commercial property, it's a little bit different. They can't just force you. You have to agree to sell your property for whatever they're willing to pay you, basically. So what happened was that the Ballard neighborhood of Seattle was kind of undergoing sort of a urban rebirth, where there were companies coming in and they were tearing down a lot of the old houses that used to be there, and they were putting up commercial buildings, stores, restaurants. They were putting up condominiums, things like that instead. And so they went in and they paid people for their homes and their property so they could build these big properties, condos, commercial properties, etc. And in this one particular block, they wanted to build this huge mall, like multi-story mall, shopping mall, and so they bought all the houses on this block except there was one that refused to sell. This was Edith Macefield, and she was in her 80s and had been living in her house for 50 years, and she had no desire to sell. They offered her, in 2006, they offered her $750,000 for her house. It was only valued at $120,000. And she said no, she was not going to sell. And so they decided to build anyways. And so they built this whole thing that basically totally envelops her house all the way around behind it, huge on both sides of it. And then her little house, I mean, it's a tiny house, right in the middle. I drove by it and saw it. It's crazy. So anyways, her house is there in this big, huge shopping mall, multi-story, all around her. They actually built it so that if she did decide to sell, then they could when they tore it down, it would be able to incorporate that space into it fairly easily. They actually then offered her again 2 years later in 2008. They upped the offer to $1 million for the house. Not only would they give her $1 million, but they would pay to buy her a new house somewhere else, and they would pay for a home healthcare professional because at this point she basically was in need of regular home healthcare. And once again, she said no. And then at this point, she sort of becomes like a media icon. People start to think that she's a symbol of something. She's standing up to corporate greed or something else like that. And so she becomes famous, at least locally. She becomes pretty famous. And so she eventually actually befriends one of the construction workers, believe it or not, that are working on this huge shopping mall. He becomes really good friends with her. He ends up like taking her to doctor's appointments and helping her cook meals and all kinds of things. She never really gave interviews. She wasn't interested in any like media attention. Like if media came there, she wouldn't talk to them. Even though they were like interested in her story, not trying to bash her, they were trying to make this great story of her. But anyway, she wouldn't do it. It turns out that basically that she didn't really, the money didn't matter to her, and she just wanted to live out her last days in her house, in the house that she lived in for most of her life. And so what ended up happening is that she did pass away in the summer of 2008. And she died in her house, which was, I think, kind of fantastic. Now, the house, she actually left it to that construction worker, who then sold it to, eventually later on, sold it to an investor. And actually, right now, the house is still sitting there. Nobody has done anything with it. Like I said, you can go see it now. It's still there. The crazy thing is, though, that Edith Macefield has sort of, like I said, become sort of an icon in the area. There's a tattoo shop in Seattle that will give you the Edith Macefield tattoo, which was a tattoo of her house with the word steadfast underneath it, because she steadfastly refused to give in, even no matter how much money there was. There was a 2013 concert in her honor, music concert, to honor her steadfastness against the money and everything else, that she just stayed there. So anyways, to me it was a fascinating story of this woman who refused to take the money and just wanted to live out her life in her house. So anyways, now you know the story of this little house in Seattle. Oh, another thing, a lot of people thought that maybe you've seen the movie Up, that she was the inspiration for the movie Up. And they even went to her house. Like, this was after she had passed away, of course, but I don't think that it was not actually the inspiration, but the whoever made the movie company thought, oh yeah, this ties in nicely, and for promotion they actually went and tied like hundreds of balloons to her house and took pictures, and there was a big promotional media day there and everything else. So they sort of used it to their advantage. But anyhow, that's the story. I hope everybody has had has a great day, and we'll see you back tomorrow.
Bye.